Hi guys, this is Screencast 2. Sadly, Screencastify only allows me to record for 10 minutes. So, unless I upgrade, which I think I may end up doing. Nonetheless, so we've been talking a little bit about poverty. And I identified before the break and the cutoff that the poverty rate kind of adjusts and flip-flops a little bit. And if you want to learn a little bit more about how the poverty rate is determined, we'll talk a bit about that. And I'm happy to address that on Monday if you'd like. But recognize that it has to do with how many people are within a family and how much money is being made from employment or non-employment. So roughly speaking, certain populations live in more abject poverty than others. No surprise that Native Americans live in more abject poverty, I think, than any other group. Although you can play around with this a little bit when you get on the census website. I just say no surprise because that's a historical trend, something that's been occurring in this country since the late 1800s. About 22% of African Americans live at the poverty level, as opposed to about 9% of the white non-Hispanic population. But again, that's something you can kind of dig around in, and that is 2000 census numbers. So when you go onto the census today, you'll look for updated numbers, and I think that would be really interesting to look at is the poverty rate. And some of that is tied to my next bullet point, which is education. It's really interesting to see kind of breakdown of education by racial group. And you can also, I think, do that by geography when you go to the census website. So what do I mean by that? Well, in 2000, about 42% of Asian Americans over the age of 25 had a college degree, right? And that's roughly twice the national average in 2000. So what this tells us is that as a result, people with college degrees tend to have a higher median income. So if 42% of Asian Americans over the age of 25 have a college degree, that's going to tell us that a larger amount of Asian Americans are going to have a higher median income, meaning that they're making more money. So it's tied to education. And I'm going to challenge you again, when you go onto the census website, to look up other racial groups and then also do it by geography to see which states have the highest level of education. Let's talk about our age. Well, we are definitely a graying population, right? In 2000, 65% of the population was older, and it was becoming, 65 and up. That population is the fastest growing population in this country. And what does that mean? Well, it means that there's a lot more Americans over the age of 65, and that's because of the baby boom. And I think that's one of your terms on your list, actually. The baby boomers are the name that we give to this generation who are now in their late 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s. And they were born after World War II. And the average family size after World War II increased pretty dramatically. Many families prior to World War II had 2 children. After World War II, 5 children. So as a result, there's this much larger, older population of what people call senior citizens. What does that mean when it comes to demography and politics? It means that because we have an older population, and that older population tends to vote and engages in politics quite a bit, that politicians are going to pander to that population. That's why people get nervous, and you see this sort of big backlash today about things like cutting Medicare, right? Medicare is healthcare for the elderly. Well, if that population is the one that votes the most, and it is a large bump in our population, cutting Medicare is going to have an immediate political impact, and politicians will struggle to be successful in their districts if they start rallying against senior citizens in programs that favor them. So I think it's an interesting thing to consider. It is also, I think, a factor as to why policies that impact folks your age are not heavily talked about, because you are a smaller population, right? There's a lot of people who choose to not have children today, and that's just not something you saw a great deal of, 50 years ago. And so family size has dropped a bit. And again, you'll be able to play around with that a little bit more on the census website. So let's see what else. Let's talk a bit about where we live. So where do we live? Well, the population is definitely growing in certain areas. We see it growing a great deal in the South and in the West. A lot of folks are moving out to the West. We see a growth in the Pacific Northwest and in places like California. And, why does it have an impact? Well, my last point here is reapportionment. Reapportionment is when our federal government has to adjust the number of representatives because the population has adjusted, right? So a state might gain or might lose a representative based on how many people are living in their state. So, for example, if more people are leaving Idaho but are moving to Washington, it could be that the state of Idaho actually loses a representative. Currently, they have 2. They could go down to 1. We might gain that 1. And this happened to us in the 2010 election. We actually gained a seat here in the state of Washington. And so a new district had to be created. Right? We know that we live in the 3rd district. Well, a new district had to be created. It just so happened that district ended up being created around the Olympia-Tacoma area. Now, why does that matter? Guys, think about what we know about a little bit about politics. The Olympia-Tacoma area is going to have a higher tendency of Democratic voters. So if you create a district in that area, it is more likely that a Democrat will get elected from that area versus if you create that district in eastern Washington, right? Republicans tend to get elected in the center part of the state and the eastern part of the state. If a new district were created there, it would essentially be a Republican seat. But if the district is created around Tacoma, it's essentially going to be a Democratic seat. So it matters where these districts are added, and that impacts the nature of reapportionment. And again, reapportionment happens every 10 years. So I've given you a ton of information, and I'm sure you've been busily writing. But if you have questions about this, you can feel free to contact me, or you can hold them for Monday, and we'll go into this a little bit more. And on Monday, we'll get into poll science and talk a little bit about the validity of polls and where our first sort of public opinion polls developed and how they're used today. So have a great day, you guys. Have a safe weekend, and I look forward to seeing you on Monday. Thanks for being great students.